Reciprocal wills. What is a reciprocal will? Well, generally speaking, it's when a husband and wife are on one accord and they share the same assets, and if one predeceases the other, the surviving spouse takes all. In other words, in the wife's will, she's going to give everything to her husband, and in the husband's will, he's going to give everything to the wife. Well, there's a situation that we're going to call the Titanic. When people were going down, many of the women decided not to abandon their husbands and get on the rowboats, because the women could have been saved. But many of them stayed behind with their husband, and they both perished. So when I write a will for someone, I always have a section in there that talks about survival, because if you don't define survival, then you have a great dilemma when you cannot determine who died first. So you need to have a survival clause, or you need to look to see if your state has some uniform acts that will interpret who died first. Okay, you can actually define if you want to. You can just say, if we are in a accident together, that we are going to agree that husband went first, wife went first. You could do that, but that's kind of tricky, and that's kind of hard to get people to decide upon. I like using time periods. If the person, the last person who survived 60 days, or at the time of the will, who had died first. So that way you can have a cut-off point, because if the person, even if it cannot be factually determined as to when the person died, you could say that they have to survive 60 days, or whatever day you want to, you could say 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, it doesn't matter. You could even say 30 days. So you set a time period, and then you say, at the filing of my will, whichever is, at the probating of my will, whichever is earlier. So that way, if your date of death was January the 5th, your husband they have to prove that your husband lived 60 days after you did, so that he could be determined as the one who survived. You could go that far. So if the person died a day after, then that would mean that you were the person who actually survived. So it generally doesn't happen that people die at the same time, but it's a possible, and it's a plausible event to contemplate, particularly if you all want to do your distributions to each other, because you don't want your will to be tied up into probate and there's a contest as to what will should take control. So just think about ways of, when you talk to your attorney about drafting a will, if you want, you and your husband need to sit down and think about what you're going to define survival as. And if you want to say a person died first, you can do that. But before you make that ultimate decision, I would advise you to get the tax consequences of basically determining who would be better off with the tax savings if you elected the spouse over another